Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Broxton Davis. I'm a performance media analyst at one of the top advertising agencies in the world. I'm also the host of the Broxton Digital Show, where I bring on some of the best marketing and advertisers to, give you guys the insights and advice that you need to go out and either dominate your career, your job search, wherever you're at in your early career spot in the advertising and marketing world. This show kind of brings you those insights and advice that you need. Today, we have a really special guest on. I've been super excited. This was one of the guests that when I founded the show was like, if I can get this guy to come on my show, I think I'm doing something right. And, here we are 12 episodes in, and here he is. Ladies and gentlemen, Casey Hurbis is with me today.
Hey, Broxton, hopefully you weren't keeping the bar too low in order to have me here. But listen, it's a pleasure. And, I got to meet you, recently. And I'm always happy to, meet a fellow Spartan and get a chance to tell a little bit about my story and, talk about the amazing things that are happening, in the marketing advertising industry, and especially here in, what I think is the greatest city in the world, Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, definitely. It is such a cool scene here in the Detroit ad scene. I know I'm only about a year into my career, but just the things I've learned, the people I've met, kind of the culture I've got immersed into has been so amazing. And I know you've kind of bounced around a little bit in your career, but you did start out here in Detroit. I guess that's kind of where I wanted to start is, how did things kind of start out for you and how'd you get into advertising? Because I'm sure
Yeah.
at the beginning, it wasn't, I want to be the CMO.
No. And, I've been in this business, Broxton, for 30, what year are we in? 2026?
Yeah.
34 years. 34 years. And you've been in it a year. And I distinctly remember being where you were, 34 years ago. And it goes by very, very fast. And, yes, I've done the CMO gigs and we'll talk about that. And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And, in life, there's a great quote. You ever seen the movie Ferris Bueller?
Yes.
You
It's
have?
been a minute,
Matthew,
but
a minute. It's an old movie.
yes, I
But
believe I
there's a
watched it
great,
in college.
yeah, did you? Matthew Broderick. And there's a great line he has. He's in the shower and, he comes out and he says something, goes, life moves pretty fast. If you don't look around once in a while, you might miss it. And so, here we are in Detroit. I am born and raised in Metro Detroit. I'm what I call a very typical Detroit kid. My great grandparents immigrated to this country in the early 1910s, early 1920s, and like a lot of folks back then, they came to seek a better life from Europe, Eastern Europe more specifically. And if you think about what was happening back in the 1910s, early 1920s, it was the automotive boom, right? And it started with the Ford and General Motors, and then Chrysler in the late 20s. And folks, as they immigrated to this country, they were looking for a better life, and the middle class was born in Detroit. There's the old line from Henry Ford, like, $5 a day wages. That was unheard of. And middle class was born in Detroit. And, I'm third generation. I was the first kid in my extended family to go to college, to be blessed enough to go to college. In some way, somehow, I had the grades to go to what I think is the greatest university in the world, the Michigan State University.
Go green.
Go white, in East Lansing, Michigan. And like a lot of other folks that start out, I had no idea what I wanted to major in. And I was influenced by a neighbor of ours that was in advertising. And this is how quite easy and simple it was. We used to have a little boat on a lake. And there was a gentleman there, and he would be on the boat, and he'd be, hanging out, whatever. And our boat was next to him. And we'd start talking, and, at one point, I'm a huge sports fan. We'll probably talk about sports.
Definitely.
And he offered me tickets one day to a Tigers game, and we couldn't afford to go to games and all that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what do you do, Mr. Zinchuk? He's like, I'm in advertising. And I'm like, you get free tickets in advertising? He's like, yep, I get free tickets. And I'm like, that sounds pretty cool. So when I went to Michigan State, I was like, I don't know. I think I want to go. My dad wanted me to go to accounting. And he was like, you should go to accounting. That's a good, honest job. And, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Dad, I think I got too much personality to be accountant. I think I want to go in advertising. And that's kind of how I landed in advertising. And, and I didn't know the world was a lot different back in the mid 90s, Broxton. I mean, you did not have LinkedIn. I would go to the library, to the big red books, which it contained every ad agency in the country. And I would literally write down the name of an agency, the address of the agency, and it would list like the executive leadership. And then I would go to Kinko's and, make a cover letter and a resume, and I would mail it, and I would hope to hear from them. I didn't have email. I didn't have anything, but, that's 35 years ago now. And, I was fortunate enough to get an entry level job, just like what you're doing now at Publicis, on Chrysler. I started on the Chrysler business right out of college, on on the tier two Chrysler business, which at the time, it was the predecessor to Publicis. It was, there was several agencies that, handled the Chrysler business at the time. Campbell Methuen SD, CME, KHBB, Bozell, and BBDO. And over the years, ultimately, it was BBDO. And at the time, until we closed the doors of BBDO in 2000. Oh, geez, what year was that? 2011. BBDO was the largest agency in Detroit. Had 2,000 team members that serviced the Chrysler business. And I started them right out of school. Was there 17 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that history, but absolutely loved it. I mean, became a leader at a very young age, 27 years old, a vice president of the agency, a senior vice president at 29. And, that started Detroit. And we'll talk more about probably automotive and mortgage and sports betting along the way. But I am Detroit. Third generation, very, very proud to be part of this advertising community. And I've been doing it a long time, but really enjoy being part of just a vibrant advertising community of Detroit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love being a part of that community too. And what a cool story kind of getting into advertising for you. So many similarities between, kind of how I got into things and you, from like first gen college students and not really knowing what you want to do in college to, it's funny when you came in and spoke, I think it was my junior year. I just switched over to advertising management and was like kind of unsure of things. And hearing you speak was one of those moments of like, okay, advertising seems pretty cool.
I didn't steer you away?
No, yeah. I was like, this guy seems pretty cool. It was right when you started at Bet MGM. And I was like, marketing for sports betting company?
Was that Julie Beatty's class?
I believe it was one of Julie's.
486 or
yes, one of the 400
370
levels.
something.
I think it was actually 300 level because it would have been my junior year. But yeah, like I remember walking out of that class like, all right, advertising's pretty cool. It's more than just, a lot of the things I was looking at was like data entry, data analysis.
Sure.
So that kind of opened my eyes to it. And I hope for anybody who's listening that, when you graduate college, you don't have that experience, or maybe you don't have that background with a bunch of, your parents and family members in the industry, you can make a pretty dang good career for yourself. I mean, just hearing that story alone, what you've made for yourself out of your non-traditional entrance into advertising is pretty cool. But one big thing too is I don't think, the SVP at such a young age and everything like that comes just kind of doing things by the motions though, which we'll get into. I think, you bring level of tenacity to the work you do. And like, that was one of the reasons I was so on fire when you spoke at Michigan State. I was like, this guy knows his audience and is delivering it. So just super excited to kind of dive in here. I know one thing that I wanted to talk with you about to kind of start is just, you're already somebody who kind of aligns with what this show is going out there to do. And that's, help the next generation. It's a crazy time. And I know you're serving right now on the Michigan State Alumni Board, or the ComArts Alumni Board.
Yeah, ComArts Alumni Board, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So would love to hear kind of, what you're doing there, and just, right on the front lines, what are we doing to, make sure these college students are ready to go out and dominate in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, the School of Communication, Arts, and Sciences at Michigan State, I mean, I think there's 4,500 students, 70,000 plus alumni of ComArts across the country. And I've always just been one that it took a while, but when I was younger in business, it's easy to be selfish and only worry about yourself. But as time kind of rose and as time went on, I'm a big believer in, giving back, paying it forward, whatever you want to call it. I've done that several different ways. One was I coach when I was very young. I was 23 to 27 years old. I served as a big brother in Big Brothers Big Sisters when I lived in Memphis and Houston before I moved back to Detroit. My wife and I adopted children. I did swim lessons. I coached water polo at my alma mater. I went to high school here in Metro Detroit. And but along the way too, as I rose up in leadership at the certainly at the agency, and then over to Chrysler, and then Rocket, Bet MGM. There were platforms that were made available about giving back. And I've loved being around younger people, if you will. And, as mentioned, Big Brother, Big Sisters, adoption, and, when it coaching. And when I wanted to get involved at Michigan State, a lot of times when you graduate from college, the only time when you hear from university is when they want money. And, as my career was continuing to rise, I would get those phone calls. And then the phone calls would intensify, and then the pressure would kind of intensify. And I remember I had like a moment at one point of like, okay, I understand, you're looking for money and money is important. But I think I have something else I can provide. And I remember I was meeting with someone that their job was to raise money and, through alumni. Was I like, I want to give you something that is, more than monetary. It's my time. And I was like, and she's like, I hear that a lot, basically. But what does that look like? And I'm like, what do you need? And it started with going up and speaking at classes, like you mentioned. And then that led to the opportunity to serve on the ComArts Alumni Board. And it's chaired by the dean. And it's, probably 12, I don't know, it's like 15 to 20 accomplished leaders all over the country. Some are retired, some are active, and it's an opportunity to help guide and consult the dean and their staff, and then ultimately how do we work with the students and provide opportunities, whether it's bringing awareness on internships, speaking at classes, helping shape curriculum. Right now this is the fastest the amount of change that we see in the world of media and the consumption of media is changing so fast. And so it's like, how do we get ahead of it with the students? So it's meeting with the dean and going, like 2 years ago, it would have been like, what are you doing in AI? 5, 6 years ago, it was like, do you have programmatic, curriculum? Now it's like, what are you doing with AI? And, and one of the things when I was up at Michigan State last year and I spoke to the 486, which is like the last class you take before you graduate, I asked all those kids in that class that day, like, how comfortable are, and this is rhetorical, but how comfortable are all of you with AI? And I could tell by looking in their eyes, not very comfortable. And my message to them was, you're already too late, meaning get comfortable with being uncomfortable with AI. And then I left that class and I went to the advertising 205 class, which is like that was the first class I took.
Same.
That was the first class you took in advertising. And what I told the students and this was now 2 years ago, remember ChatGPT's only been around 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I told those freshmen, I go, those kids that are walking the line here next week, whenever it was, they're already behind. Because as an employer, I'm going to ask Broxton when he walks out of Michigan State, what do you know? 2 years ago, I was like, do you even know AI? Do you even know how to use it? Not like, can you do a 30-second video, or can you build me a whole segmentation with AI? It was basically, do you know AI?
Right.
But what I told those students 2 years ago was, by the time you leave this university in 2027, 2028, y'all better be proficient, because that is going to be the ante to play, but that's going to be that 10-15% difference maker when you're trying to find your first job. And that's the kind of influence that I like having or trying to instill in students. I just talked to the dean yesterday, and it's like, and about, opportunities, like how can we alumni be more involved at the university to help students and prepare them for, their next step in life.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe that's, what a good call by you 2 years ago, telling those
Yeah.
freshmen that's some invaluable information right there. I'm sure they're looking back on like, man, that guy.
Because they probably didn't realize, like, oh yeah, AI, but I mean, Judas Priest. I mean, you can't, I'm learning at the same time as everyone else, right? I'm more of a mid adopter, but it's like, I'm taking AI certification classes and things like that, because there have been moments throughout the last 30 years. In 99, it was like, how's the internet going to start shaping, e-commerce, if you will?
Yeah.
In 99, nobody was thinking about buying a car online. It was unfathomable that you would order a car and take delivery of a car in 1999.
I believe it.
In 2011, 15 years ago, Broxton, only 1% of e-commerce or commerce was done with a mobile phone. And then the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
And 3-4 years later, mobile e-commerce surpassed PC. You look back on that right now and you're probably like, it sounds silly. It sounds silly to think about when we used to sit in meetings in 99 and go, I remember I was in the automotive business at the time, and car dealers were like, they'll always, don't worry about it. The internet's great for books and music and travel, and maybe clothes. No one's ever gonna like build a car and order it and take delivery online. Real estate agents. I mean, trying to sell my house. I'm like, why don't we list the house on the internet? And you know, he's like, oh, we need to have flyers, and I want them to call me. It sounds silly now, but it's gonna like for your kids, it's gonna sound silly when you tell them. Let me tell you, in 2023 and 24, 25, 26, there was this thing we started hearing about called AI. You know, it's going to sound silly 10 years from now, the influence, and we're at an inflection point right now. And but how do we get students prepared and you know have that tool that you know that toolkit ready, you know, when they graduate?
Definitely. Well, I think you being there is something that obviously speaks to just how great the Michigan State Com Arts program is. I think it's definitely just in the country, and now being in the industry for a while, I see like there's a clear difference in the schools who really lean into it and the schools, you know, who don't. It's just the kind of people they can bring in, the different kind of resources they can provide. So, you know, if you are thinking about this as a student or a prospective student, like, you know, really think about that, because that really is where you lay that foundation for your career. And, you know, having an alumni board with people like Casey on it compared to, you know, maybe you never even meet your alumni board while you're a student. You know, a lot of different opportunities can be open with that. So just super cool to hear you're, you know, always giving back to the MSU community. And I definitely feel the same way. You know, that's one of the reasons I started this show, is just people dump so much into you to get you to where you need to be. Yeah, it's just, you kind of got to pay it forward, like you said. I did kind of want to get into now. I know you started kind of in the agency world too,
Yeah.
where a lot of the people who watch the show, and even just, you know, a lot of seniors that are in college right now, or maybe even people I know that graduated when I graduated last year, are still kind of searching for that first full-time job in the industry. And a lot of those people have their eyes set on a lot of large agencies, which it's, you know, a very interesting landscape right now with a lot of the different agencies. But some things do stay the same. And I just am wondering, you know, based on your experience back when you were on an agency side and what you see right now in the current climate, how can people my age kind of start to, you know, just leverage what they have and strategically start to get these jobs at agencies? Because it is such a great place to start.
Yeah. And you know, as you mentioned, Broxton, when I graduated, I started working at, like, I didn't know anything else. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go work at an agency, and you know, and I was fortunate enough to land an entry level job at Chrysler's agency, which I mentioned at the time was CME, and working on tier 2 dealer business, and you know, and I was there for 17 years. And I will tell you, I wouldn't trade those 17 years I had at an agency for anything. In that, I got to learn and be exposed to I mean, the world was a lot different back in the mid 90s. You have to understand, like, there was no digital, there was no social, it was very traditional. A lot of print and audio and certainly TVC and video work, but there was no digital and social.
Right.
But, you know, I got exposed through different, you know, I was an account person, you know, and I was exposed to media planning and buying, you know, creative development, strategy, you know, like all the components that went behind it. And it offered, and plus working at an ad agency, I love, because you had all the facets of marketing and the funnel at the time. And very, you know, generally agencies are young. I remember when I was, 35, 36, I remember looking around one day at the agency at BBDO. I'm like, holy Toledo, I'm now the old dude here. When did that happen? And when I talk to students, I just did one. I have a good friend of mine. Their daughter just graduated from Alabama, marketing advertising major. She was my intern at Rocket a few years ago, and she's like, "Okay, I'm graduating. Now what? Now what?" I'm like, "All right, like, my recommendation to you is you go work at an agency, because an agency is going to provide, like, you think you know what you want to do, you have no freaking idea what you want to do. I still don't know what I want to do. So when you work at an agency, guess what? You now have the opportunity. You're going to, you know, you're either going to be going to an area that you got hired into, or you're going to have an area you think you want to do. It's kind of like an internship. Use that time to figure out, like, I love performance marketing. Fantastic. Do you want to do that for the rest of your life? Be the best you ever can. But if you're going to, like, I couldn't for you, you're in performance marketing. I tell everybody, if you're, no matter what, learn performance marketing. Because if you don't have that background, you're not, that's going to be a building block that if you don't get performance marketing experience, at some point it's going to hurt you. And data and performance, like, so when I talk to students the same thing about AI, I'm like, understand data, understand performance marketing. If you think you're just going to go work on brand and you're going to go like, if you don't know performance, you'll never get there. or it's going to hurt you at some point in your career. And working at an agency, like for you, like you could be working on performance marketing for whatever, X amount of time. They're like, okay, done it. I like it. I appreciate it, but I want to expand my skill sets. And you are so much more marketable now to go work on like on brand and the digital, whatever it might be, like, or on, because you've got that, you got it. And that's where I'm so thankful in that the major bulk of my career at BBDO, CME and Bozell was on the retail business, which at the end of the day is performance marketing, right? You can't have flashy Super Bowl ads and you can't have big partnerships with celebrities, and you're not going to go put your car on the moon if you don't, put some sheet metal over the curb. And that's where, retail pays for all those bills.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point, is that, without the kind of backbone of the performance and the data, that kind of flashy stuff doesn't happen. And that kind of like hit me
Pays
pretty
the bills.
Yes, that kind of hit me pretty hard going into performance media. I definitely had that idea in college of like, can't wait to work on my first Super Bowl ad. Can't wait to, help build a brand. And then, you're in there looking at Excel sheets and crunching data and making minor optimizations. There can be times where you're like, this is, not what I thought it was, but you're so right. I'm seeing the value
It's a building
now.
block.
Yes, and it's also, you're building your foundation. If you can understand, how to drive revenue at the end of the day with performance media, you can start to do, all the other cool stuff once you're driving the revenue. So I think another important takeaway for the people who maybe are agency side right now that are listening is you can get that skill set without specifically learning it in college or without being at the agency. Like, go do a meta certification, get on these platforms, learn how to do some basic media buying. I mean, just like you were saying, that makes you that much more marketable when you do start getting into conversations. Because I know just like right now, it's pretty tough for students graduating that are looking to get into the agency space. So
yeah, I mean, where did I don't know if it was you or somebody else. I heard an example the other day for like, like I don't have any experience. Well, like, you know what? Take mom or dad's, get $50 from your mom or dad and figure out something you like. I like dogs. Okay. Then go to the Michigan Humane Society and put together something and just put $50 into something and learn how to optimize against it and learn and test and learn along the way. Or, I'm sure there's like probably some type of modeling or some simulation things that you could do.
Oh, yeah.
So when you walk in, you have the interview, like, yeah, like I'm very passionate about Michigan Humane Society and I put $50 of my own money in and we did this. And because I was trying to drive awareness for whatever it might be, Adopt a Puppy Week. And that's a story to tell, because you're not, guess how much experience you have before you have your first job?
0.
Jack shit.
Yeah.
Jack shit. Yeah, you have internships and blah, blah, you have jack shit, but like, how do you get that, So when you walk in for that first job, like, hey, I've done this. I volunteer my time, or I did this AI certification. I did this at AdCraft. I did, I volunteered anyone that goes into sports marketing. I'm like, everyone wants volunteers. Go volunteer at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. Go, raise your hand to do hospitality at the Final Four next year in Detroit. So when you get ready to graduate, you're like, yep, I volunteered at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. I, ran hospitality on behalf of Chevrolet at the Final Four at, Hudson Building. That's impressive. There's so many opportunities that young people can have, but they're not going to fall in your lap.
Yeah, that's definitely the secret, is you got to go out and get them. And like, we are living in an age now where, like, especially with AI and the different tools out there, you can have the perfect resume, you can have the perfect cover letter, but when it comes to what you can actually do, can you actually
Everyone's
drive
got
results?
the perfect resume, dude.
Exactly.
Everyone's got the story. What is that 5, 10, 15% that makes, we'll call it HR or a hiring manager? I mean, when I hire people, like, let's be honest, like, you're in front of me when I'm listen, as a CMO, and I don't do a lot of, we'll call it entry level hiring, but let's just pretend I did. And let's say I'm the hiring manager or I'm the director and I'm hiring someone in at an entry level. You're already in front of me because of the paper. You've gone through the gauntlet. You've gone through a screener. You've met with HR. You maybe have met somebody else. And then, okay, I'm the director or the senior manager, whatever it might be, and I'm going to hire you for an entry-level job. You're in front of me already because you have a good resume. What I'm looking for is like, hey, like, if Broxton is here, what's it going to be like when the shit hits the fan? How's he going to react when he hears the word no for the first time? Is he a cultural fit? What's the vibe of the team? Like, I'll teach them and coach them, but I'm looking for like, what's that 5, 10, 15%? You know, I look at resume and like, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, you did. I'm like, I'm looking at like, what did he do outside of classes? Was he not an entrepreneur club? Did he like, he was a fraternity, the president of his whatever club, or he was the treasurer of his fraternity? I want to know about that, because no one wants to be the treasurer of a fraternity. And by the way, when you're the treasurer of a fraternity, you got to break bad news to people. How'd you handle that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know
As
what
a
I'm saying?
previous
Like,
treasurer of a fraternity, that's something,
yeah, like
you could speak on that.
I want
way
to know
more.
that, because that's leadership.
And like as during my interviews, that was something I would speak on way more
Yeah,
than
you
any
all
of
went,
my
you all took,
internships.
you all took these classes. You all have done this, but what are you doing outside of the classroom? And that's where I'm going to be able to learn, like, what, you know, what are they going to be like in a professional setting? So that's where, you know, I tell students, my son's in high school, and I was talking to a young man. He's going to be a freshman at state next year. And I'm like, don't piss away your freshman year by just effing around. Like, he's a direct admit to the Broad. And I'm like, get involved in boss, get involved in the future leaders in sports. You know, in ComArts, I would say the same thing. Go learn what 42.7 is at Michigan State. Go meet with your, there's so many flipping opportunities for students, but too many students piss away their freshman year by like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden they're feeling like they're trying to catch up. And it's building blocks. Don't get an internship your freshman year. Go home, enjoy your parents, enjoy your friends, relax. You've had a crazy 2 years between your senior year and freshman year. You can get an internship yourself. Like, I'm not going to hire someone because they had 4 internships versus 3. Now you better have at least 1 by the time you graduate, but having 4 versus 3 interns ain't going to get you that like gig.
Right.
You know?
And I think maybe almost the internship gets a little bit too idolized because it gets talked about so much in class and so much by professors. Your parents expect you to have something to do in the summer when you come home. But, really, like you were saying, you can get just as great experience by finding, a local nonprofit or something and saying, hey, can I run your ads or even just run your organic
by the way,
social
you're working
for
at
free?
Dairy Queen. I want to like, guess what? That is client service. That is conflict resolution. That is like, you have a manager that maybe doesn't like working with young people. Like, how'd you do? Like, if you worked at Dairy Queen your freshman summer, I'm going to ask you questions about that, because I'm going to be able to pull out like, how did that react? And, like, what happened when 2 of your buddies called in sick that day? How'd you handle it? And there's a line out the door.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of stuff translates
Yeah.
so much. I think, some of the best salespeople you see are people who worked at like a bar or at a restaurant beforehand and were just a killer server. And,
Yeah.
the tools definitely translate. One thing I definitely want to talk about too is, after your agency experience, which I agree with you on, that's definitely the best place to get your experience, kind of, grind your teeth a little bit and learn what you need to learn. But then pivoting kind of becomes the next thing. You get 2 years, 3 years into your career, and there's a lot of different options now. You see a lot of people pivot to ad sales, a lot of people pivot client side and really start chasing that CMO title. And then you also see people who really want to run it up in the agency world and continue to move up there. What's your honest take on what you think the best move is, and kind of how you can navigate that? Because you've made some pretty big moves in your career.
17 years at BBDO, and I was one of the last of Mohicans. Like, all the people I started with, right out of school. I mean, at the end of 17 years, I think I was the only one there. Like, because my mindset was, my father was a firefighter for 25 years. And I mean, I just had this mindset, like, you get a job, you work somewhere for 30. I mean, that was what I grew up around. Friends, dads, I worked at General Motors for 30 years. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. But my hand was forced. In 2010 and 11, Chrysler went into bankruptcy, came out of bankruptcy. They put their business up for review, and BBDO lost the business. And that's where, and I'm not going to Publicis quite yet, but so here we were, an agency of 2,000 strong, largest agency in Detroit, when, well before we went, Chrysler went into bankruptcy. I think we're down to about 1,000 coming out of bankruptcy. But long story short, we lost the business. And, so I was loyal and I stayed on with the agency. And I literally was the guy that almost took the key out of the door, like when everyone got walking papers. But I was fortunate enough that I was offered an opportunity from Omnicom, which is a holding company, to stay on. And we were chasing other automotive business. We kept the tier 2 business intact. But along the way, I'm a firm believer everything happens in life for a reason. We're going to talk about that later. is I got a fateful phone call one day from one of my clients at Chrysler. When Chrysler came out of bankruptcy, employment levels were the lowest since the Great Depression. Everyone left. Like, people retired. They're like, this ship is going down. I'm not going to go with it. They came out of bankruptcy. They turned the lights back on. They didn't have an agency. And, you know, they're like, well, we need people to do marketing. And they're like, well, everyone kind of left. Well, what about the agency? Well, we fired the agency. And like, well, where are they? They all got better jobs, or they all went to different places, you know? And so I'll skip ahead a little bit. So there's about 15 of us that ended up joining Fiat Chrysler Automobiles at the time when Mr. Marchione took over. And so what was very interesting about that, Broxton, is, you know, was it on my roadmap to be a client? Nope. I thought I was gonna be an agency guy my whole career. But I got that fateful phone call one day, and I had a lot of respect for this client. So I went and interviewed with them, and I was like, wow, very interesting. I might want to do this. And what is the next chapter for me? So it was very intriguing was, you know, on Friday, I'm the agency guy. Let's just say, I'm gonna use you as my example, Broxton. On Friday, you and I are coworkers at BBDO. On Monday, I was your client.
That's crazy.
And then let's just say Broxton was my client on Friday. On Monday, you worked for me. And that was interesting, you know, going from the agency to the client side. But what I really believe is that the best client in marketing and advertising, the best clients are those that have agency experience. Because if you know, meaning you're empathetic, you understand the process, but you also can weed out the bullshit. Like, I used to work at an agency. Don't tell me that. I was at Chrysler at a very, very exciting time. Right when Mr. Marchione took over, they came out of bankruptcy. And within 3 months of being at Chrysler, I was asked, I'd always worked on tier 2. As all of a sudden I was asked to go lead the Fiat launch in the US brand. I had never been on a shoot. I had never done production. I had only been a tier 2 auto guy. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I remember I was maybe 2 weeks into the role, and there was already a concept sold in to go shoot a commercial with Charlie Sheen. And I told the CEO at the time, like, all right, I'm going out to LA. We're shooting this Charlie Sheen commercial. And he's like, why are you going to LA? I'm like, well, we're spending like $1 million on this production. Like, I'm going. And he's like, why would you go to the shoot? You've been on hundreds of shoots. And I'm like, yeah, of course. And I was like, oh my God, this guy, I've never been on a shoot. And you know what I did? I went to a guy that worked there, and I'm like, can you go to lunch? And we went to little Coney Island, and I was like, what happens on a shoot? Like, I've never been on one. I look back on that moment, and the reason I tell you that story, Broxton, is if I would have not gone for that job, or I told him that I'd never been on a shoot, I might have been dead in the water. And I think about moments like that, and that's happened many times in my career where I had no idea how it worked, but I was going to figure it out. And now I look back on it, like, I've been on hundreds of productions. I've done 7 Super Bowl commercials, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, award-winning shit. And it all started somewhere. And so getting that experience on the client side, like, and, you know, I've only been on the client side since. And it's led to, you know, roles at Rocket Mortgage and Bet MGM in different industries. Like, so what I tell young people too is the client side's pretty damn good, you know, but get agency experience first, and that's going to make you a better client along the way.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. It's kind of, you know, in a sense, you know, there you go. But what a cool story too. And it just kind of goes to show, like, you never know when you're going to get those opportunities, or, you know, saying the right thing is going to get you into a room where maybe you shouldn't.
And I didn't lie. It's not like when I interviewed for the role, maybe they just assumed I had brand experience. I don't know, like, but I didn't lie to get the job. You know, I'm like, yeah, I know automotive. I understand the dealer network and retail. And
Right.
At no point did I was like, well, yeah, like, I've done, you know, this Jeep shoot in Antarctica and da da da. But you know, now I've been on productions all over the world.
Yeah, it's so cool how just one little moment like that can kind of change the trajectory of literally everything.
Yeah,
Like, that's crazy. You saying yes, you know, sent
Yes.
you to where you're at
I
now.
mean, that's one of my biggest lessons to younger people when they get in this business is be yes before no, because you never know where that's going to lead.
Yeah,
If I would have said no to whatever, I don't know. Might not be. My trajectory might have been totally different, and I've failed many a times along the way. I mean, there's times where I said yes, and I'm like, bad idea. I go, that didn't work well.
And I think the cool takeaway for young people that we have the advantage right now is you can say yes to something and then go chat with 20 AI agents on how you can actually
Jesus
do
Christ,
it and use
yeah.
the entire internet to figure it out.
Guess what? Yeah, right. You know,
When
now
you say
back
yes-
then I was like, hey, Broxton, can I go by a Coney Island and then tell me everything that happens? Now I can, you know, I could literally in 3 minutes probably have a damn good idea of the production process and what to expect. I mean, I was like asking questions like, where do you sit? Like,
Yeah.
where do I weigh in? Do I talk to the director? Like, you know, and what should I know? I mean, I knew the, you know, the basics, but I didn't know like how to conduct myself as the client and how I could, like, I just don't want to go there and, you know, sit there and drink my San Pellegrino and be catered to and have people kiss my ass. I'm like, I want to make an impact. Like, I want people to come back. I'm like, I'm glad Casey was on set. What we ended up with was better because of the value that Casey brought, not just the fact that he signed off on a script or, you know, signed a check.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think, you know, obviously carrying that with you into any room you enter is kind of how you get to areas where you're at, like as far as getting up to that C-suite level. You kind of got to bring that every day into every room. And I know that's something that's hard to do. Like, you know, there's life outside of work. There's a million things going on. What were some of the ways, especially earlier in your career, but even now, that you're able to bring that tenacity and that level of care every single day? Didn't have that one planned, but just
Yeah,
I'm honestly
I'm
curious.
trying, you know, I'm trying, like, I mean, first of all, the life work balance, you know, I had a CEO of one of the companies I work for once said, life work balance is bullshit. It's called life. And those lines have become beyond blurred. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where I used to love getting on a plane to go to LA because that was going to be the quietest 4 hours of my life. And then Wi-Fi became available. And now I can take a Teams call on a, you know, cross-country flight. And, you know, like, and, you know, while technology is our friend and technology makes things so available, I mean, just the idea of, you know, very early in my life, I sometimes wonder, like, how the hell did we get work done? When I left the agency at 6, 7 o'clock at night, I didn't have an email to check. I didn't have a fax machine at the house. Nobody was going to call me at home to ask me about anything. And it all sat there until 8 a.m. the next morning. You know, it sounds silly now, right? And, but level of care, you know, a lot of it is, you know, instilled. A lot of it is instilled in the way that you're brought up, and, you know, give a shit factor. Like, I care about a company that I work for. I care about the brand. I care about the mission. I have to believe in the mission, and we can talk about that. And then as I became a leader at 27 years old. And I guess how much leadership experience I had? Zero. And at 27 years old, I think I led 12, 14 people, 8 of which had been in business longer than I had been alive. And that was daunting. That was baptism by fire. There is no handbook. There is no class. You know, there was nothing that prepared you for it. And I'm still learning as a leader. Now I'm going to do the math, 27 years later. You know, I've been a leader for 27 years and my style has changed. It's evolved. And, you know, I'm having to learn different ways to lead, especially generational. You know, and, you know, I remember being a Gen X guy and the boomers would sit in the room and say, you know, the end of the world is around the corner with Gen X in charge. Yeah, as they come in charge. Now I'm that guy, saying the same thing. But the same thing that the boomers said about us, I say, you know, I shouldn't say I say, but you know what I'm saying? Perception.
Yes.
You know, I'm like, I remember when that person sat in the corner and used to say that we're lazy. Gen X, you're lazy, you're entitled, you don't work hard, you don't know what it's like. I say the same exact thing. It's just different.
Well, it's refreshing to hear that it's not just our generation that's getting told that.
They all said it. Guess what? The golden, whatever they call the golden generation, they said it about the boomers at some point. And, you know, so.
That's a great point, though. Just like one big thing there, obviously, is just like literally giving a shit. Like, not enough people, I think, especially my age, are consciously thinking about that every day. So I think, just that advice alone is like, just kind of think on a day-to-day basis,
Like your give a shit factor will get you far in life. I promise you.
And if what you're doing is something you don't give a shit about, it kind of shows itself right away. Like you can
Are you in the right,
realize,
yeah.
and
When it comes to careers, I mean, there are moments, make no mistake, but when you do what it's an adage and it's a quip, and you could say it's a cliche and it's overused, but if you enjoy or love what you do, it makes life a lot easier. There's nothing worse than if you're doing something or you're working somewhere that you dread getting up in the morning and going to or coming home. Like that affects everything. It affects you. It affects those around you. And, I've seen people many a times leave jobs that they maybe liked because they were chasing something different, and they realize like it wasn't worth it. Like I always say, they chased a zero and then they get there and, that extra zero in a paycheck. And then they're like, they hate it. I'm like, that ain't worth it. I don't care how much you make. If you hate what you do and you just don't, or you don't believe in it, it's not fulfilling. You want to, and I'm a firm believer, like I want to be fulfilled. I want to be fulfilled in what I do. I spend more time at work than I do at home with my wife and children. So I want to be happy with what I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to think about it, and just something to keep in mind, especially early in your career. Like, I've definitely found myself in a few roles, not since college, but even just in college, like, man, I just can't stand, getting ready and going to this place that I'm working at. It's a great sign to just, switch it up, because
you're not bringing your best self.
Yes, yeah, and once
and
life,
are you making those around you better either?
100%. And once life happens, it's a lot harder to make that switch than, when you're sitting there just graduated from college or even still in college. So it's just such a great point that when you're at this age is something that can really, if you think about it, can position yourself for a lot better future than you might have if you kind of, get trapped in something that you hate doing. One thing I was really curious about too, I know we've kind of talked about some of the, big initiatives you got to work on, a bunch of different Super Bowl ads, a bunch of different awards. I would love to hear, since we got you here, and I'm sure, some of the marketing nerds that listen would love to hear too, what is, one crazy story that you'd like to share that, obviously is a nice takeaway for the students, but I know you've done some crazy stuff in your career, so.
All right, I'll tell one. So I'm very, very fortunate. I've been able to work on seven Super Bowl campaigns, 3 while I was at Chrysler, and 4 when I was the CMO at Rocket Mortgage. And the craziest one, and it was in 2020, and for those of you that remember, 2020, I'm sorry, it's 2021. Sorry, it was going into 2021. It was happened in 2020 because when I've worked on Super Bowl campaigns, Super Bowl's in February, and usually start the process in June or July. I mean, if you're going to spend 10 million, now, 13, 14 million on a 60-second spot, blah, blah. I would say Super Bowl done right is a $20 to $25 million investment. And if you're going to make a $20, $25 million investment, you're going to be one of 65 advertisers in the Super Bowl. Jobs are won and lost on that day. You start early. And we would start our Super Bowl process in May or June. What was happening in the May or June of 2020? The world was shut down. We didn't even know if there was going to be an NFL season.
Yeah.
We didn't even know, blah, blah. Like, you didn't know in May. I mean, May was scary. March was terrifying, and May was scary because, what we thought was going to be a weekend at home, and you were a student at State yet or not yet?
Senior year of high school. Yep.
You just had either gone on, came back or whatever. You're getting ready to graduate, and you thought you were going to be home for a few days,
like
and you didn't
spring
walk.
Break. Yeah, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, and you lost your senior year, or the back half of it. So, is there going to be an NFL season? I don't know. Is there going to be a Super Bowl? I don't know. Are there going to be stands, field, but whatever. But all right, let's bet on the come. Let's understand that we think there's going to be a Super Bowl, and let's start looking at ideas. So we generally would start with 150 ideas through agencies, and we ultimately whittle down, and then we make a call on the concept. And the concept that we aligned on was from a great agency called High Dive out of Chicago. They had done the Super Bowl ad for us the year before with Jason Momoa, and they brought us this really amazing concept. It was called Pretty Sure, and it was centered around like, hey, when you want to make the biggest life decision and get a mortgage, you can't be pretty sure. You gotta be certain. And this whole idea was like, you sure, I want to be certain. And we end up aligning on Tracy Morgan as our talent.
And this shoot was audacious. It was an 8-day shoot, multiple sets. This is before the world of AI. And as we were, kind of planning through it, California at the time had gone through, was at the COVID had come back. Like when I say people started to come back to work in September, October, then it flared up. Everyone went back home. The governor shut down Michigan. We all went back home. And in December and January of 21, California was beyond raging. It was to the point, Broxton, where they told people, if you get in a car accident, don't come to the hospital. We don't have room for you. Our priority are da-da-da. And, Hollywood was threatened to be shut down. So like, is this really essential work? Like,
Right.
is filmmaking essential work? And filmmaking's like automotive in Detroit. Like, it's pretty essential. The economy is built around it. Long story short, and it was all COVID. So it was an 8-day shoot. We 6 of us test. We didn't fly commercial because we wanted to be bubbled. We flew on a company plane, and we get to LA, and we all had separate cars because we had to decluster ourselves from each other.
Right.
Like we got to LA, and we went, and we all had separate cars, and we stayed at an Airbnb with we all had our own bathrooms and bedrooms, and we weren't allowed to congregate. We had to be bubbled from each other. So we went to LA for 3 days and like tested. Okay, we didn't spread COVID on the jet to LA. We're now here for 3 days. We're all bubbled. Let's go shoot. And literally, I'm the client. I'm sitting here, and you're the art director. You're 6 feet away, and we couldn't talk to the talent, and no one could touch each other. 3 days into the shoot, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Someone comes over and says, "Did you hear?" Well, did I hear what? The assistant hair and makeup person for Tracy Morgan tested positive with COVID. That's not good. Shut it down, the set right there. And then they were doing what they call contact tracing. And what we come to find out is there was 6 people that were then we figured out were at high risk of COVID. And Tracy Morgan was not, thankfully, knock on wood, did not contract COVID. But then we were trying to shoot the next day. And we got a phone call that said it was union shoot. And they said the union, blah, blah, refused to show up to set. And so I had to call back to Detroit and go, we're shut down. What do you mean we're shut down? We're COVID ripped through the set, and we're going to have to come back in a month. The Super Bowl's in 6 weeks. I'm like, I know. And it's going to cost 7 figures more to come back. Long story short, we then figured out a plan. We had 5 days left. We ended up getting the 5 days done in 3 days. We did not finish the edit of the spot and have it approved until Saturday morning at 3 a.m. I shipped the spot at 4 a.m. Saturday morning and ended up winning USA Today Ad Meter #1. But what no one tells that behind that story is when I called literally in tears to my executive leadership at Rocket and said that we're done. Can you send the plane to come get me? and I was like, I don't know if we're going to be able to deliver Super Bowl. But it's those moments that make you tougher. And, when COVID happened, no one had a playbook of which to work from. And I learned so much during that. Like we learned virtual production and we learned how to do things different along the way. I mean, that's that one I'll always remember. And it did so well. I mean, it won USA Today Ad Meter #1. We actually ended up doing 2 spots that year. We went #1, #2. I think Bud Light's the only other brand ever to go #1, #2. And that feels pretty good for a little Detroit based, mortgage brand.
Yeah, I mean, how cool. And honestly, hearing that story, I do got to ask too. I know you had that amazing run at Rocket, and then over at Bet MGM too, you were also the CMO there.
Mm-hmm.
Would love to hear, a cool story from over there too, since I got you here for a minute. I know you got to work with, some pretty crazy talent. I see a bunch of different stuff on social media of you and Derek Jeter together.
Yeah.
So would love to hear something cool from over there too.
Yeah. So after 7 years of being at Rocket Mortgage, almost 8 years, I asked myself, like, is there something else? Again, firm believer, everything happens in life for a reason. And I got a fateful phone call one day that Bet MGM was looking for a CMO. And I was like, what in God's name would, Bet MGM want to do with a mortgage and auto marketer? What I come to find out is they wanted somebody that didn't have gaming experience, and they wanted somebody with a different perspective. And so there's another industry. I had zero mortgage experience before I started at Rocket. I had zero sports betting and iGaming experience when I joined Bet MGM. And, the first task I had was the brand is doing well, but it needs a recharge. And so jump back in. And my first task was, how do we restage the brand with Bet MGM in a very competitive space? And we rebranded. We did the rebrand. It led to the Make It Legendary campaign. Worked with Jamie Foxx in the past. We wanted to, and respectfully move on from him. He's fantastic. And I brought forth John Hamm, quintessential, like, he's a guy's guy, and women love being around, women love him, men love him. He's so super talented. And we're very, BetMGM is very fortunate to have a lot of, like, the who's who of retired athletes. I call it the Mount Rushmore. Barry Sanders on football, Wayne Gretzky on hockey, Tim Howard on soccer, Kevin Garnett at the time on basketball. But we didn't have a baseball guy. And I've met Derek a few times, and I end up getting with his representatives, and I'm like, dude, if Derek's willing to, entertain this category, there's only one brand he should work with, and it's us. I mean, we've got the Mount Rushmore, and we started working with Derek, and BetMGM started working with Derek Jeter, and now he's on the portfolio. So it's been an honor learning that industry. It's so fascinating, and it's changing so fast with, the growth in the U.S. and prediction markets. I mean, it's kind of like AI, dude. It's changing so fast, and every day I wake up and there's new news about how that industry is changing.
Yeah, it's definitely a crazy industry to work in. I know, like, I'm a big UFC fan and follow that, and it seems like their primary bet sponsor switches every couple of events.
Yeah.
They have, a new predictions market or a new sports book that's, coming
Or
in
some
and
guys
making some noise.
walks in wearing a poly market chain, and
Yes.
the Logan Paul's involved with Better, and and it's the space, it's growing 15 and 20% every year, and sports betting's been around for decades in a gray market and became, legalized in the U.S. in 2018, and it's so early. And you see just a lot of change in the space every day.
Definitely, no, and what a cool story. And I want to say to everybody listening too, I'm not just asking to fan out about Casey's amazing career. I'm asking because, like, there's a major point to be taken away from here, and that's, like, kind of like what we were saying earlier. You need to say yes to these opportunities and go after this stuff.
I mean, I asked myself when I got that phone call, like, BetMGM's looking for a CMO. And what did I say to myself? Why in the hell would they want to talk to a Detroit-based automotive and mortgage guy?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what I said. I haven't told this story before, but I mean, Lord knows how many CMOs they were talking to. And at the very end, this was my pitch. I was like, you're looking for this from marketing as a marketer, like brand, and like I've done it, Chrysler, Rocket, whatever it might be. I got it. What I don't have is sports betting and iGaming experience. If you're willing to take a chance on me, I'll do my damn. I mean, I'll bring the same fire, passion, energy, and care that I did at Chrysler and agency Chrysler and Rocket here. And but I will tell you one thing: when I was blessed enough to get the CMO job at Rocket Mortgage, I had zero mortgage experience, zero, and it worked out all right. I was there 8 years, and the average life expectancy of a CMO anymore, and big brands, sadly, is 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years. I made it 8, so I was playing with house money, a gambling term at that time, and I'm like, so here I am now, 18 months later, and I recently just left BetMGM, and but now I've got yet another another industry experience that I've just added. At the tender age of 54 and 34 years in business, I've now just added more experience because I decided to say yes. Yeah. I wasn't afraid. It could have been intimidating going, I don't know sports betting, and I don't know, and I don't want to go to New York 200 days, and I don't want to learn new people, and I don't want to be part of the New York ad scene because I'm in Detroit and everyone knows me in Detroit, not everyone knows me in New York. It could have been really freaking easy for me to say no, but I said yes, and I'm so much better for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the Casey 18 months ago is probably a lot different person than the one I'm sitting here talking to. Yeah,
I've grown
that's
a
so
lot.
Cool. And I also want to say, breaking news to some, you did recently leave BetMGM. And I just want to talk about that too, because, you know, to kind of really put the cherry on top of this industry is a roller coaster, and
Yeah.
stuff kind of comes and you got to roll with the punches. Prime example right here is, you know, you had an amazing 18 months. The brand is in, you know, one of the best positions it's ever been in. And now you're on to the next thing. You know, what does that kind of look like for you, Casey?
Well, Broxton, in 34 years, I've never, this is the first time since I was 13 years old that I'm not setting my alarm in the morning to go work, and I'm only a couple weeks in here, mid-May, and it's, it's interesting. It's brand new for me, but what have we talked about earlier? Like, it's yes before no, and I'll figure it out. And, I've been doing this for 34 years and I still don't know what I want to do. But the good news is there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities. There are brands that need senior level marketing. I mean, when CMOs leave brands every 2 years, you know what that creates? Opportunities. And so, every day you look at Ad Age or blah, 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 and there's CMOs leaving every single day. So that's an opportunity. Being able to consult and advise companies or brands that are certain parts of stages, growth stages, or, brands that, hey, our CMO just left unexpectedly, and, this thing is $1 billion spend and we need somebody with a hand on the ship. Or a brand, a brand that says we want to invest in Super Bowl and we don't know how to be a Super Bowl brand. There's so much opportunity. So I'm in the discovering and, figure out what's next phase. And, it's a little bit daunting, but it's also on the flip side of it, it's exciting, because 2 years ago, I never would have dreamed that I would have had the opportunity to lead Bet MGM. And I wasn't even looking.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking, and, I'm just hoping that, 34 years of experience, networking, I spoke at your AdCraft event last week, and my message to all of you was, when it comes to networking is more about the farming than it is the hunting. And one of the things I've been very proud of and, prideful of, and because I'm passionate about it, is networking and building relationships. And, what we're going to find out here is how my field, how my garden's been doing.
Definitely, yeah. And that's such a great point. Yeah.
It's, we'll figure it out.
That is a great attitude to have. It's really the only attitude you can have about it, because if not, there's so many downward spirals you can kind of go on in a situation like that.
Dude, it is so easy to spiral. It is so easy to go down a rabbit hole. And one of my early mentors in life, it's a coping mechanism, but this guy, when I was that young kid working at the agency, he was a god to me. This guy, like, rings, great hair, dressed impeccably, best cologne. And I was like entry level guy, and he took a liking to me, and, whatever. He probably found humor in me and whatever it might be. And as I grew into leadership, he was still there. And then I got to work for him directly for a year, and it was like the best year. And he used to say something that, it's so simple, but sometimes when I'm at that fit of like, is like, it is what it is. And I can sit here and go, why, what, but you know what? It is what it is. And to me, everything happens in life for a reason. And it's a sign that, the best is yet to come. And that's going to be my approach.
Definitely. And I'm super excited to see where you end up. I definitely think, just seeing what you did in that short time with Bet MGM, wherever you do land, it's going to be some crazy stories coming out of, whatever brand that may be. I do kind of just have one more question for you here, and then a couple fun ones to kind of round stuff out on.
Right.
But last one I had for you, I like to try to ask this to all the professionals I interview, is just, we've talked a ton about your, entry into advertising, how you figured stuff out along the way, and, where you're sitting at right now. I guess the kind of, 10,000 foot view, if you could step back and just picture yourself sitting in this chair as, 20 to 22-year-old Casey, what's that one piece of advice that you would say, you should be doing this instead, and what kind of difference would that have made now?
It goes back to what I just spoke about, the power of networking, and that when I was sitting in your chair a long time ago, there was no internet. I told this story last week.
Yeah.
There was no internet. There was no LinkedIn, and your networking was literally hand to hand. It was going to happy hours. It was going to the going away parties. It was going to the advertising events, wherever it might be, and collecting business cards. And, you didn't send them an email. You didn't have email. But, and then, LinkedIn came about. And I was like, at one point, I think I'm in the top, like,
top 1% earliest LinkedIn, subscribers. A buddy of mine, he runs the Pistons marketing, sales and marketing here. He told me about this thing. I'm like, LinkedIn, like, what is it? He's like, it's basically an electronic Rolodex. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I signed up, right? And not even thinking twice about it. But this is a great example right now, as I mentioned, like, over time, like I didn't put enough time into networking when I was younger. And it was just like, I call it like I walked through life with blinders on, like, okay, what's in front of me? And my world was BBDO. My world was not Detroit. World was not like the nation, or the global advertising, industry. It was like BBDO and Chrysler, my own little fiefdom. And then over time, I was like, it might be, and especially as I grew in my career, of like, it might be, it might be interesting to learn and meet different people and keep connections and whatever it might be. And it is crazy how networking and the power of relationships and a connection that you make today, Broxton, I promise you, you're going to make a connection here in the next 6 months that you might, and it's a great friendship, relationship, whatever it might be. And then life moves on. And I promise you, there's going to be someone that person will come back in your life 10, 15, 20 years from now. And, and they're going to come back to your life and, and you either pick up where you left off, or they're going to know you for who you are. That happens every single day. Every single day. Going through, like leaving Bet MGM and being quote unquote in the market, I am not shocked, but I'm so pleasantly surprised the people that maybe I haven't talked to in 5, 10, 15 years that, I'm going to look at my phone when I leave here today. And I promise you, I've got 5 text messages from, hey, I saw, or I heard. It happened last night. Someone like, I haven't talked to in a number of years. They're like, I happen to be talking to, and they said, you left, Bet MGM, and hey, I know, or have you thought, or I'd like to. That's the field. And so what I tell young people is like, it's easy to be consumed. It's so easy to be self-consumed and only worried about yourself. But bro, you need your tribe around you. And you don't know you're going to need your tribe until sometimes it's too late.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. That is some killer advice to kind of round out on. I mean, it just goes to show, why even, I'm spending all this time making this show is like, stuff is so important.
You're giving back.
Yeah, and you're also building the foundation for the rest of your career. The people you meet today are, like you said, going to be the people in 10,
Think how many
15
people
years.
you've met in 12, 14 episodes, and hopefully you do 100 more. And, you're going to get momentum, dude. People are going to continue to see these. And don't be surprised that you're going to have folks like pinging you going, hey, when can I come on?
Yeah, definitely. That's the goal. So that's, you just got to keep putting in those daily inputs is kind of the methodology I've went about. And, I'm sure, you've gotten to where you're at kind of doing the same thing. So I did want to round out on some more fun questions, kind of lighten things up a bit. I always like to end.
Questions?
No trick questions. No, typically I do a rapid fire value segment where we just go over, tips, tricks, that kind of thing. I also want, the students to kind of start to get to know my guests too, just because a lot of my guests say, hey, hit me up on LinkedIn, reach out. I want you guys to be personable to the guests too, because it can be intimidating. So expect some personal ones, expect some work-related ones. But to get started, what would you say right now for students, young professionals, #1 learning resource that they should be leveraging that they might be sleeping on?
Sleeping on? Well, I talked about that earlier. Like, become dangerous with AI. And there's so many resources that are available, whether it's self-taught or, free Google or LinkedIn, courses. Like lean into that. And also, like, I can't stress enough anytime I'm around my kids when they're graduating high school, like you better have a LinkedIn profile by time you walk into university. Don't wait until your sophomore, junior, senior year. Like my daughter graduated from high school and the day after she graduated high school, I'm like, you're setting up a LinkedIn account. And she's like, I don't even have nothing to say. I'm like, yeah, you do. Like you work at the movie theater. You volunteered at church. You were a varsity athlete. Like no one expects you to have 14 levels of experience, but guess what? You've done all this stuff. Tell people about it.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice. And you're right. There's so many resources out there to literally just teach yourself how to do this kind of stuff.
It's all there for you, man. Take advantage of it.
Definitely. Totally different. I know you're a little bit of a pizza connoisseur. I've seen from some other podcasts and stuff. I know, you've kind of been all over the US, but here in Detroit, what would you say #1 pizza spot? You have to hit it.
Listen, I am a traditionalist. Buddy's Pizza for me. I mean, that's
It's a Detroit staple.
Detroit staple. I mean, there's that always forms a source of debate. Buddy's Pizza. I'm a big fan of Jets, the 8 corner. When it comes to that side of the world, and it's so crazy. I didn't even know what Detroit style pizza was until like it was never a thing. And now anywhere you go in the country, I remember when I first saw Detroit style pizza, and I don't know if I was in California or somewhere, I was like, what the fuck is Detroit style pizza? Like, it's pizza. Like, it's Buddies. And, now it's crazy that, everywhere you go, it's like the hottest thing. And then you even saw like, I don't know, it was Pizza Hut or whomever did it, but it's kind of fun. Right. And so I'm a Buddies, and, Jets is also high up on my list.
Yeah, I've been a big believer in Jets is like the best fast food pizza. If you're going to grab takeout from somewhere, that's the spot. But Buddies is also killer. Before we talk too much about pizza, because we probably sit here and debate on it all day, I do want to know, you're talking about AI skills and getting on the LinkedIn and learning how to navigate that. What about for students and young professionals? What type of soft skills should they really be leaning in on and making sure they have mastered before they get out into the real world?
This is simple. It's beyond simple. Know how to shake a hand, look in the eyes, hold a conversation. What I tell young people about is like, don't ever be intimidated, in talking to somebody. And if you're ever intimidated, here's the simplest trick in the world, especially in our business. Everyone loves talking about themselves.
I've kind of figured that out with the show.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I'm saying? And here's another, because of the internet, before I meet with anybody, I know about them. I've been to their LinkedIn. Maybe I, stalked them on the Insta or blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I were to interview, let's say you're interviewing me today, I know everything about you. Like, let's say you're interviewing me for a job.
Yeah.
I know where you went to school. I know where you used to work. And and if you're active on social, like, I know you have 2 kids and you're a big Spartan fan, and, you think Jared Goff is the worst quarterback in the country and in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's easy to find this stuff out.
Do your freaking homework, and worst comes to worst, and you're a young person and you feel intimidated. Work the conversation. Like, what is that 1 or 2 or 3 things that I promise you could sit in front of Dan Gilbert, and all you have to do is bring up Michigan State or the Cavs or his kids, and you'll be good for an hour. Yeah, everyone likes to talk about themselves or a shared interest. Find out what that shared interest is.
That's a great point, because like I know
it leads to different things.
Yeah, 100%. I know I've struggled with that, just like being intimidated strictly because of the title, and then you get talking about sports or something that you two might click about, and it's literally you're just talking to another person.
It's another analogy, and it's a quip. But I remember I was and I won't say the who, because that person's very well known in Detroit, but I was intimidated by someone once, and someone pulled me aside and said, "What's wrong with you? Like, you're not acting like yourself." And I'm like, well, and this was not long ago, less than 10 years ago. And I was super intimidated. And I was getting feedback, like, you're not yourself. Like, where's Casey? And I'm like, well, and you know what they go? He gets up every morning, he puts his pants on the same way you do every single day. Be yourself. And it was like, boom, it was a bee slap across the face. And I remember I was in front of that person 2 days later, and I freaking flipped the switch on it, and it would like totally change the trajectory of that relationship, because I was like, you know what, that person is just like, they might, different stature and level and, influence, whatever it might be, but that dude gets up every morning, puts his pants on just like me.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I laughed when you first said it, because that's something my dad always told me. And like, I remember I called him super nervous interviewing for jobs when I was still a senior, and he's like, dude, these are all just normal people. They might be, I don't come from the white collar background or anything, so it was so intimidating. And these are people just like you and me that you're talking to. So that's some great advice. And I think, any student who's out there really stressing about the networking thing, like, start sliding into some LinkedIn DMs and, just talk to people. The worst thing you can do is ignore you, say no. So that's some awesome advice. Now, kind of go back to a little bit more fun. I'm really dying to know, especially with the auto experience, we both kind of have that shared experience.
Yep.
What was your first vehicle, and now what did that lead to you driving now?
Oh, my first car, I used to cut lawns as a kid. I had my own lawn business when I was 12 years old, and that was great freaking money, by the way. And I bought a 1979 Datsun B210, which, you know, you could Google it and look at it. And it didn't have a radio in the car. And my dad, we bought the car, super proud of it, $700. And my dad went to a junkyard and found a totaled out Cadillac and pulled the radio out of the Cadillac, and he mounted it inside the glove box of my 1979 Datsun 210. That was my first car. And then now, I talked about my grandparents at the top of the show here. My grandfather worked at Chrysler on the line when he came to this country. We only drove Chryslers as a family. I worked at Chrysler business for 25 years, and I've only driven Chrysler vehicles my whole life. I'm a Jeep guy. I've just driven Dodge, Ram, Chryslers, but I've probably owned 30 Jeeps in my life. And I drive a Grand Wagoneer right now. My wife drives a Grand Cherokee. My daughter drives a Renegade. I have an old Wrangler. That's a fun car. And then my son's turning 16 this year, and I was looking at the new Cherokee. That looks cool. And of course, he wants a Wrangler, and he ain't getting a Wrangler. I promise you that. But yeah, Chrysler.
That's
vehicles.
awesome. I mean, great case study on, once you get into that car brand and what's really your thing. I mean, you're a great example of now the whole family's driving them.
Yep.
And that's what we're looking at.
Chrysler was good to my family, my grandfather, and, it put food on the table for me, for 25 years, and, I'm loyal to brands.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. I guess to kind of round things out, is the last one I got for you is, if you're that student who is sitting there, super high anxiety, senior, not the experience they want, what is the one thing you'd say to go out and do to just take action to get things rolling in the right direction?
Got to get started somewhere. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, like, you got to get started somewhere. And do not be discouraged with no's. I have been turned down for a hell lot more jobs than I've ever gotten. Right. So many jobs. You know how many times a company had called, or, I used to get, I'd have headhunters call me, and I was never afraid to have a conversation. Meaning, I may not be interested in leaving, but you never know what's on the other side of a conversation. And maybe it's a connection. Maybe it's a recruiter hey, I'm not interested in this role, but I'd like to stay connected, because guess what? Guess how many recruiters I'm calling right now? I got the Rolodex of recruiters from over the years, and hey, but I've been turned down for more promotions when I was at the agency. I was turned down for promotions when I was at Chrysler. I was not, I wasn't in that position at Rocket or Bet. And but don't be discouraged. Everything happens in life for a reason. If I would have been promoted to an account executive in 1995 versus not promoted and staying in my account coordinator job, and then a year later I end up getting a different role, I might not be here today. It might have totally changed the trajectory of my career. When the Ford agency called me when 1998, and as an opportunity to go work on the Ford Tier 2 business, and all of a sudden they're like, well, we need you to move to Pittsburgh. And I could have moved to Pittsburgh. It could have been easy, but I'm like, I want to stay in Detroit. And, it was, but if I would, I probably wouldn't be here today. Yeah, I don't look back on it. I have zero regrets. I have no regrets. And, and have I made mistakes? Yeah, absolutely. But what did I learn from those mistakes? And so one would be get started. Don't be discouraged. And, the day that I don't learn something new or make a mistake will be my first.
That is, some great advice, and I think is, great to anybody who is sitting in that chair. Just go get started. That's really what you need to do. Anything is better than nothing, even if it feels like you're not making progress, not moving towards the goal you might see as, I want to get this job, or I want to end up at this company. Those daily inputs are super important. But that kind of rounds out everything I have for you, Casey.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Huge shout out to Startup Nation here in Birmingham for letting us film in their studio.
It's a great place, isn't it?
Yes, awesome place. Definitely check it out if you're in Birmingham. But thank you again, Casey. Once again, this is the Braxton Digital Show. My name is Braxton Davis. That's all we got for you guys.